But first, night before time, the Morrison government is finally moving to honour its election commitment to protect religious freedom. Now, the difficulty, as always, when trying to protect rights is what you do with one right clashing up against another. What do you do, for instance, when Israel Folau's right to quote the Bible clashes with Rugby Australia's right to protect its brand? What do you do when the right of a religious school to uphold its ethos clashes with a teacher's right to live an openly gay life? What do you do when the right of a religious hospital to respect life clashes with a patient's right to an abortion? Or all states now bar New South Wales to assisted suicide or euthanasia? It's not easy, is it? As the Morrison government is finding out. According to Frank Brennan, the very well-regarded Jesuit lawyer who served on the Ruddock inquiry into protecting religious freedom, there were two schools of thought inside the government on this. The Turnbull wing that wanted to tweak discrimination laws so religious institutions were clearly allowed to uphold their ethos, and the Morrison wing that preferred a religious freedom bill. Initially, it seems the Morrison government wanted a Folau clause that would have required any employer wanting to dismiss someone for expressing a religious view to show some sort of financial damage to the brand or business. Now it seems the government has settled on something that will stop religious people from being deregistered as doctors, for example, for refusing to provide perhaps an abortion or euthanasia, but will stop religious hospitals from refusing to allow the same abortions or euthanasia on their premises to their patients. If so, and I stress the government has not yet released the proposed draft legislation, just briefed backbenchers on its direction, it could well be that religion has even less protection under the government's religious discrimination bill than it does now. And this is the problem. Any attempt to codify rights invariably makes them either stronger or weaker. And in the current climate, the rights of gays not to be offended and the rights of people to access abortion and euthanasia were always likely to trump the rights of religious people to proclaim their beliefs and to act in accordance with their conscience. Ask yourself this question: would Israel Folau have been so vilified if he'd been a Muslim quoting the Quran rather than a Pentecostal Christian quoting the Bible? Anti-discrimination laws were first introduced in Australia in the 70s and 80s when religious and other prejudices were still invoked to justify treating minorities differently. Those laws have worked so well and society has changed so much that it's now unthinkable that anyone would be refused a job or paid less on the basis of race or gender. Instead, in a very different society, laws meant as shields are now used as swords to attack practices and beliefs that once would have been entirely unobjectionable. Folau was always going to be a difficult case. Of course, he's entitled to his views, but a sport is also entitled, it would argue, to protect its brand. But provided abortion and assisted suicide, where it's legal, is available, why should religious doctors in hospitals be forced to provide it? As always, it's a question of getting the balance right. And the problem with passing general laws enshrining broad principles, is that they always have to be interpreted by judges. And these days, judges are much more likely to be socially progressives than legal conservatives. That's why, on balance, I have to say I'd prefer to leave political problems to the Parliament than hand them over to the courts via bills like this. Often the best thing governments can do is avoid making a bad situation worse by passing new laws that could end up having unintended, unforeseen consequences. On balance, a commitment to legislate religious freedom, as opposed merely to believing in it, is one that would best never have been made. And as things stand, by leaving it so late in the term to introduce, this legislation, we can be confident, won't actually pass the Parliament. And this whole debate will turn out to be more about perhaps striking an election pose than making a difference before polling day.